Good evening. I'm glad that Norm ended with the very apt direction to you to think about the teachers you've had and the bad teachers versus the good, because I'm a teacher. And at the age of 62 and almost 40 years in a classroom of some kind, I know I'm a good teacher. And for those of you, particularly in the back of the room, I don't want you to suddenly be sitting here saying, I don't think I want to get involved in this whole career. There's too many politics involved. I want to talk to you today about why you want to be a teacher and how, regardless of the press, you can take a great deal of pride in the work you do. So, I have almost 40 years in the classroom. I started out teaching in the ghetto of North Philadelphia. I got a response. I had one white student. I had a very, very difficult first year, but I had a very good mentor teacher who said to me that if by April, I could tell the class to sit down and be quiet, and they did it, I would be back the next year. It took me a little bit less time than that, but it did take me a while. I was a hippie, I had long pigtails, I got my ears pierced to look older. I had a hard time, but I stuck it out because I really like kids of all ages. I started out with a middle school, then we moved to Maine, and I worked at Bonnie Eagle Middle School, which is a very rural school. Had a good time there, got to be a better teacher. Finally got Lewiston to hire me because they needed a debate coach. I didn't know how to debate, I'd never debated, but I said I did so I could get in the door. I love teaching. It is a terrific career. It's not a career that you're going to get a great deal of money for, although I agree with people that we definitely should be getting more money. But that's not really why you get up every morning and go there. You go there because of the difference you make. And you have to understand that you will not win every battle. If you have a class of 30 kids, let's go for 17, 18, 19, 20, 24. You're going to try to win each of those battles individually, but you may not win them all. That does not make you a failure, and that's one of the reasons I really loathe the idea of comparing teachers' excellence in the classroom to the scores their kids get. I know my luck would be that they had a party the night before and they're really tired, and then they got tested and I'm going to get fired. No, we're not going to do that. When you look at these kids, you have to understand where they're coming from. And yes, some of them are going to be poor. Some of them will not have English as their first language, but they want to succeed. And that's one piece that no one ever talks about in education. When those students walk in your door that first day, they want to be successful in your classroom. They want to earn A's, and you should want them to earn those A's. I always said that if I were the best teacher in the world, every single student of mine would have an A. And other people said, oh no, you have to fail some to prove you're really good. No, you have to give A's out to those students who earn them because you've done a good job teaching them. So, how do you do that? You are creative. And the piece I hate most about the recent reforms that have gone on and have been foisted upon schools is they have robbed teachers of their creativity. That is the single worst thing that has happened to education in my 40 years, including block scheduling and lots of other crazy reforms. But taking the creativity away from a teacher is like taking the hands away from a surgeon. You have to have that creativity to meet the needs of your students. You have to make the students come into your classroom and look forward to the lesson. I taught history, Glenn did too. History is a fabulous subject to teach to kids because it's filled with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There's all kinds of stuff you can talk about, grab their attention. I might have a harder time in math class, but if you're a history teacher, there's no excuse for not having an interesting class. You have to do that. But with teaching to the test that is required of more and more teachers, you aren't allowed to do that because every teacher has to teach the exact same thing. That's not the way to do it. Remember, you want to teach all of the children individually. I can go on for a very long time, and I won't, Jen, because I want to get to the questions that the audience has. But I want to talk about a few of my favorite students. I'll start out with Chad. And my husband has probably never heard this name because I don't usually go home and talk about my problem kids. My first gray hair on the side was named Chad. He was the hardest kid I ever had to teach. He was so smart, and he would just sit in the back of the room with his arms crossed, and his hat, they were allowed to wear hats back then, tipped over his eyes, and I would turn myself inside out for Chad. And I couldn't get him to do anything. I won't say I was successful with him. He was not one of my great successes, but Chad passed because he was smart enough to know he could do the minimum amount. I always felt badly about Chad because I liked him. He had a great sense of humor, but I just couldn't get him to work. I saw him about 5 years ago, and he brought up his son, and he said, "This was my teacher. She was the best teacher I ever had, and I failed her." And I thought that was so interesting. I failed her. I didn't let her get me to the point that I could have. That was Chad. I have a few more. Wait a minute. I've got to get a drink. I'm not used to this light or something. Sorry, Norm. Mm-hmm. When I taught, I always have a cup of coffee in my hand. That's another thing. Then there's Sophia. And my husband's sitting there, he'll say, "Oh, I remember Sophia." Sophia was among the first students to come to Lewiston from Somalia. And Sophia was a brilliant girl, very, very astute about human nature and how people operate. Very politically smart. And some of you in the room might remember that she was one of the 2 teenagers who addressed the Many in One conference, the rally that we had right here on Bates College against the white supremacists. She was one of the 2 girls who stood up and said, "We just want to be friends. That's all we want." Sophia was an amazing girl, and I remember very vividly one day having her in study hall, and she was studying like crazy, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Well, I haven't eaten in a while because it was Ramadan." But she wasn't going to use that as an excuse, and she got an A on that test. And I remember all the other kids kind of talking about, how could she do that? She hasn't eaten since 5 o'clock in the morning. She was a person that other students began to look to as a role model, and that was so important when the Somalis first began to come to Lewiston. She was a student that other students really respected. So that was Sophia. I'll just talk about 2 more. One very quickly is named Sam. I love Sam. Sam was the first student I ever felt that treated me as if I were his mistress and he were my puppy. He spent every waking hour that he could in my classroom. But the piece I liked most about Sam was the difference that I could see that I was making with him, because Sam was tall, but he would walk stooped over. When he was a freshman, he would literally be walking down the hall with his head hanging down. But each year, his head got a little bit more on his shoulders, so that by the time he was a senior, he was running the place. And I remember vividly him addressing the city council in a big citywide rally when they were trying to cut extracurriculars. He had become a man in those 4 years, and I know that debate had part of it, a lot to do with it. Mark Trial had a lot to do with it. All the courses he took, he was a young man who took everything that we could offer him at that high school and became a man, and a man involved in all kinds of great things today. So what am I doing today? I'm not a teacher. I'm working with people who should be going to college, who were going to college and stopped going to college. And I am totally committed to teaching these people how they can get into college, get the degrees that they need to have. So the last person I'm going to talk about is Zach. I've met Zach about 2 or 3 times a week for the last year at Dunkin' Donuts, because that's where he works. And I always say, "Hi, Zach, how are you?" And we start a conversation. "Weren't you going to college, right? You didn't go to college?" "Well, I tried to." And last week, he called me and he came into my office to work. And we started looking at what he could do about getting out of Dunkin' Donuts, beginning to get into a college. And I asked him, "Well, how long did you go to college?" He told me 4 days. 4 days. So my new mission is to get Zach into college, through college and out of college. So I've got that as my new assignment. Last thing, I alluded to this earlier. You have to have creativity in the classroom. You have to have that. And I think that a lot of the federal legislation has robbed teachers of that. And one of the things that we're working on now in this community is to bring that back through student-centered learning. It's also called deep learning, where you look at what the kids want to learn, how they want to learn it, and you use the entire community to provide it. So that you can give them internships downtown in businesses. You can have them working with a prosthetic maker over on Lisbon Street. You try to find out what the kids need to learn, and you organize yourself around that. And so that's the next thing that's happening. And for those of you in the back of the room thinking of becoming teachers, please do. It's the best job, honestly. I swear to you, it is. Even the hours they're too early in the morning, but it's a great job. That's the next thing to look for, is schools that are focused on the students' needs rather than the testing that they have to achieve. Thank you.